Maybe this strikes you as a crazy idea, but certainly people in my parents' generation took this idea very, very seriously. And when I was young, this idea was taken very, very seriously as well. The thought was that capitalism requires homogeneous desires in order to function. And therefore, you could strike a blow against capitalism just by refusing to conform to sort of mainstream taste. Right? So that if you refuse to live in a sort of classic suburban home, and if you refuse to listen to mainstream music, but instead you listen to alternative music, and if instead of wearing a gray flannel suit, you wore like jeans and a t-shirt to work, and instead of buying a Chevrolet, you bought a VW Bug, the thought was that that was actually like a threat to capitalism, right? It wasn't just you expressing your individuality, right? It had radical economic and political implications. Right? So this is the idea which Thomas Frank sort of helpfully called the idea of the rebel consumer. The thought was that in your consumption choices, merely by rejecting mainstream taste, you were actually engaging in a politically radical act. Now, I think the real irony of it is that this kind of rebellion, not only wasn't it a threat to the system, it actually became, almost instantly, an incredibly effective way of selling merchandise. Right? Because it's simply not the case that capitalism requires conformity. In fact, socialism required conformity because it wasn't very good at responding to consumer taste, because everything had to be planned by bureaucrats who didn't care about toothbrushes, right? But capitalism is super good at responding to consumer taste. Look how many different kinds of toothbrushes you can buy, right? And I mean, the whole homogeneity thing was very much just a product of its era. Like when I was a kid, yeah, there were 3 kinds of coffee, Sanka. And, I mean, there wasn't much to choose from. But now you go to Starbucks and you can choose like which specific farm in Africa you want your coffee from. And which particular flavor you want added to it, and what percentage of milk you want, fat in your milk, and how much foam you want. I mean, capitalism's really good at this kind of stuff, right? Socialists were like, coffee, shut up. So not only is it not true that capitalism requires conformity of taste, but also it's not the case that individuals primarily seek conformity in their consumption choices. There is a phase you go through in high school where conformity is incredibly important. But for the most part, what people are seeking in their consumption is some form of distinction. If you ask people, why they bought this, that, or the other thing, why they dress the way they do, why they have the car they have, you get complicated answers, but all of them boil down to some explanation that refers to how much better they are than other people. People want a kind of distinction, right? Like, I'm not one of those losers who drives a whatever, right? And if you buy this whole critique of mass society that says that, yes, people are just sheep, they're brainwashed by corporations through advertising to buy all this junk that they don't need, then one way of establishing your distinction and superiority is to show that you're not one of those cogs in the machine, right? But that you're a free-thinking individual. And advertisers were like first out of the gate to sell people stuff on precisely those grounds, right? That's how the VW Bug got turned from like the Nazi car, which is what everybody thought of it as, into the symbol of rebellion. Because they were like, oh yeah, like GM, Chrysler, they're just brainwashing you, but us, look at us, right? Prove you're not a victim via VW. So people have been doing this for like 50 years, right? I mean, Apple, this was like their whole brand until they became ubiquitous. So the irony is not only did rebel chic not sort of undermine capitalism, it often, in many ways, exacerbated competitive consumption.